everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of our 2023 Greater Los Angeles Homeless Count. My name is Emily Von Henry. I'm the Deputy CIO at LAHSA. And thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend today's session. For your continued support throughout the years in conducting the Homeless Count. And thank you to our local communities. I am happy also to introduce our new interim CIO, Stephen David Simon, who will share a few words with you on the launch of our Homeless Count 2023. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the adventure that's the Homeless Count 2023. Can folks hear me again? Let me try my music is up and up. Well, bottom line, we've got a lot of information to cover today. We're very excited to have our partners, USC, here, who are statistical and demographic survey consultants. We're going to cover the homeless count methodology. We're going to cover some updates and tweaks and changes we have planned for 2023. We're going to talk about hotspots and how to collect that data effectively. We're going to talk about the volunteer improvement website, the social media toolkit, and topics and the schedule for the community information sessions. It's a minute off my little note sheet here for my talking points, because what I'm really here is to say how we at LAHSA are extraordinarily clear that we cannot do this without you. This count is a team effort. To be quite frank with everybody, this is probably the most important year of this count. We are increasingly under scrutiny, and it's really making a difference in public policy change for us to do this count as thoroughly and effectively as possible. And LAHSA will absolutely commit to partner with all of you. So I'm excited about getting it. I'm a little nervous about it, I'll be honest about that. But this team seems ready to go, and let's go. So that said, let me turn it over to Ben Henwood at USC. We're going to start off our presentation on the homeless count methodology, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much all for being here, folks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Is this working? Great. Hi, I'm representing our homeless count team at USC. I have my colleagues here, Patty St. Clair and Stephanie Kwok, who work on the data. They've been on the team since pretty much the beginning of this partnership in 2017. We also have our youth count partner at Lensco, Andrina, who's here. So when we get to the Q&A part, if you have specifics, I may turn to my colleagues. I just wanted to note that as much as this is based out of the USC School of Social Work, we also have our partner, Randall Kuhn, who's at the UCLA School of Public Policy, who's our demographer and also works on the county tests. Okay, so I think the main goal that I wanted to just was brought here today was to kind of give an overview of the method so that everyone's clear on what's involved. I think the count in a lot of ways is not as straightforward as people think, and so I just wanted to break down the different components of the count and see if anyone has any questions. The estimates of the annual homeless count really there are three different components to the count. One includes the shelter count, which is about, this past year, represented about 30% of the estimate. And in some ways the shelter count should be pretty straightforward in the sense that if you have a reliable homeless management information system and people on the ground are entering in shelter intakes as they come, you could pull those data and then you know how many people were in shelters at the end of the count. It should be a straightforward process with the caveat that not all shelters in the county report into HMIS. So once a year, LAHSA is charged with reaching out to non-HMIS shelters across the county and try to get the capacity and the number of people staying in those shelters each year. So that's the shelter count. As much as it seems straightforward, there's still some work involved to get those numbers. The other component, which is basically a separate methodology that overlaps but is concurrent with the adult count, is the unsheltered youth count. And it's a completely separate methodology. It was devised because the youth are considered a hidden population, and so rather than just being able to identify youth by a visual count, we do a survey-based count. And this is a process that relies heavily on youth providers to go out and do this work over 10 days, in the last 10 days of January typically. So we can talk about that, but that is a separate component of the count. It makes up a much smaller but important subsegment of the homeless population. Most of the estimate comes from the unsheltered adult count. And that's what I was just going to take a little bit of time to cover, because I think that involves a lot of you in that effort. So we can move forward. There are really kind of two parts to the unsheltered adult count. And one is heavily the responsibility of LAHSA, which is the street visual tally, the count that volunteers go out and do each year. And the other part of that is the demographic survey, which is what our team is charged with doing. It happens over 3 months, and we go out and collect surveys with people experiencing homelessness. And so I'm just going to cover each of those and why we have those two different components. So, again, this is really on the LAHSA side and mobilizing volunteers each year to do this. We've supported and witnessed this happen, but it's really a huge mobilization in which LAHSA goes out to recruit 8,000. Typically, it's been close to 8,000 volunteers each year. At least most of the years we've been with the count. We did not have a count in 2021 because of the pandemic, and so in 2022. You can see there were a lot fewer volunteers, only 5,000. That poses a challenge when you have to cover over 2,100 census tracts in the county. But the idea is that these volunteers who receive training, although it's minimal training, many of you may have gone through it, go out and do a visual tally of two different things, right? You count actual people experiencing homelessness that you see, and you count those numbers, as well as different dwelling types, right? And so those dwelling types could be vehicles or a tent or a makeshift shelter. And that's what you're primarily asked to go out and count when you canvass these census tracts. So it's intended to be a complete enumeration of both people and dwellings out on the streets. This happens over 3 nights, and that's an exception. In most places, this is a one-night count, but given the size of LA County, there's been an exception where HUD allows us to cover over 3 nights. And so that is challenging and requires the support of a lot of volunteers. Okay, so that's the street count. If you go to the next slide. I think what I just wanted to convey about that is what does that give us, that count? Right? In some ways, it tells us the actual number of people that we've seen on the streets, as well as all those dwelling types. And what you can see is there are far more dwellings counted than individuals counted. And this is the 2022 point in time visual tally. So once the numbers came in and were aggregated, this is what we had. Okay, there are 2 things that whole process does not tell you, right? One, it doesn't tell you how many people are in each of those dwelling types, because we don't ask volunteers to go up and knock on windows or doors or tents. So we don't know how many people are in each dwelling type. Vehicular homelessness has increased. And also, this past year, we saw a lot more tents and makeshift shelters. So this in and of itself tells part of the story, but not the whole story. So, okay, so that's the counting side. On our part, we start in December and we go out and we do a demographic survey with people experiencing homelessness. And I just want to talk through how we do that. And the two main goals of that work is to establish how many people on average are in each one of those dwelling types that we talked about. And also, we want to extrapolate from our sample of people we talk to be able to describe who is actually out there experiencing homelessness. So describe those demographics. Okay, so in order to do that, it's a process, right? And what we do, the first thing we have to do, because we can't canvass and do interviews with the entire population, is we select a sample based on census tracts that we can go and canvass and send our survey teams out to. In order to do that, right, we need to be able to select that sample. We do that. It's a stratified random sample, but essentially what we do is we take as much information as we can gather from historical information, from outreach information. Also right now, and I think we're going to talk about this later today, there are hotspot planning sessions where we ask people to weigh in. Where do you think we'll find people in vehicles? Where do you think we're going to find youth and families? We take all that information in order to come up with a sample that's about a quarter of the census tracts that are in the county. Based on that, we then send our survey teams out to actually approach anyone that they see outdoors and ask them if they want to participate in a survey that takes about 20 minutes. There are incentives for people who agree to participate. There's a $10 gift card we give. Our survey team is made up of many students, whether at USC or other universities, as well as people with lived experience of homelessness, and a lot of our surveyors have come back year after year to do this project. We have about a team of 30 surveyors that go out and do this. They start in early December and they go through the end of February. And we've increased the training. We've realized that we needed a lot of trauma-informed training when you're working with people directly out there, so we do trauma-informed training. We've kind of built that up, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Okay, so this just gives you a sense of, on any given year, we might have around 4,000 eligible surveys, so it's not an insignificant, that's a pretty good sample size for the county. We do try to get representativeness across the 8 spas, and here you can kind of see the distribution of how many surveys were collected in each spa based on the sample census tracts. Okay, so this just gives you a sense of the number of surveys we conducted each year, and again, based on that, we extrapolate out to describe the population and to come up with what we call this multiplier, the average number of people living in each dwelling type. And I just wanted to spend, you can go to the next slide, to take a second to talk about that. Right? So what does that actually mean? Because I think this is a point of confusion. Essentially, we ask people when we talk to them where they spent the last night and the past 30 days, and we want to see if anyone was living in a car, a van, an RV, or a tent or a makeshift shelter. That in and of itself, we don't always get enough people for a sizable sample, so we go back over the 6 months and we ask, have you ever stayed in one of those places? And based on that, we ask them, okay, well, how many other people were with you when you stayed in those places? And based on that, we aggregate and then come up with the average for each kind of dwelling type. And just to give you an example, sort of for Spa 1, if you go to the next slide, what that translates into, right, is that we have the actual counts taken from the night of each of those dwelling types. We have the average number of people that reported being in a dwelling type. And so you multiply the count by the average number of people in each of those dwelling types, and that's how you come up with the estimate. And you can see that for the dwelling types. Obviously, we don't have those for the individuals because those are literal counts. Okay, so back to this. If you remember, right, we had close to 22,000 dwelling units, right? So we take the multiplier times the number of units. You can go ahead. Right, and that gives you the estimate of the number of people. So we combine the actual number of people counted with the estimated number of people in all those dwelling types, and that's how you come up with the overall estimate for the unsheltered adult population. Okay. Yeah, this is just to kind of show you over time that, again, the dark blue represents the number of individuals counted each year. Again, in the gray, you see the number of dwelling types, dwelling units. And then because of the multiplier, which does change over time, and you can see the multiplier actually went down post-pandemic, and so that the estimates will change based on that. But because there are changes in the makeup of those people in those dwelling types, the multiplier changes each year as well. Okay, and I think, again, I just kind of wanted to give a quick overview, not get too in the weeds, but give you a sense of that work. Those estimates are combined with the shelter count, which then are combined with the youth count, and that's how you get the overall estimate for the COC.
So the next item I just wanted to bring up are the homeless count dates for for the 2023 homeless count. So we have Tuesday, January 24th, which will cover Spot 2. And Spot 3, Wednesday, January 25th, which will cover Spot 5, your west side of LA area, Spot 7, and Spot 8. And then on Thursday, January 26th, we'll be covering Spot 1 in the morning, Spot 4, and Spot 6 in the evening. And then, of course, the youth count are going to be from January 21st to the 31st. So these are your dates for 2023. So the issue about hotspot planning selection process was brought up. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind kind of going over that whole process.
Hi everyone. Brian Brown, Associate Director of Data Management at WASTA. So yes, hotspot planning, as everyone discussed, very important for the county. We are currently working with every SPA in the coordinator meetings to roll out how to use the hotspot planning survey. It is very crucial that we get as much information in that as quickly as possible, so we can get these, get the information to USC to get this happen. There was a couple of snags with the rollout, but I think last week and this week, by the end of this week, we should have spoken with every SPA. We've got one-pagers on how to use the survey. If anyone has any questions, please send them to us right away on how to use the tool. But yes, please work with your communities, your SPAs, your coordinators to fill out as much information as you can in these. We're trying, I believe, and USC, correct me if I'm wrong, have everything submitted by the end of next week, November 4th. So that looks right. And with that information, USC can do what they need to have the most accurate information so that we hopefully have less challenges with hotspots seeming not accurate as to what they should be.
So a couple of items were mentioned about new developments for 2023. As we mentioned, and everybody alluded to, we definitely are moving towards for the PID count, a new app. So we are working with a new developer to make sure that we have that available. We are definitely going to be working on streamlining the trainings, setting all that up with all of you. We want to make sure that right now what we're trying to do is set up the app to be as easy and user-friendly for our previous volunteers who have a long experience and may not be as tech-savvy. The whole idea is that this particular tool is able to be utilized by anyone. We are also going to have contingency plans, so we are going to be having our map and tally sheets together just in case. We are going to collect that information as well there. On the shelter count and housing inventory count, we are working to, instead of having particular data from the shelters and the housing inventory programs, to be able to collect that information throughout the whole year, so it's not something that you're trying to get during the same time and the peak hours of the homeless count session. So we are moving towards that, but in the meantime, we are also to bring in more support to be able to get information from that non-HMS provider, because that information is also crucial, and it is a little bit more difficult to get them from those individuals, groups that are not participating in HMIS. For the youth count, one of the things that definitely we've heard loud and clear is that we want to be able to have what are called blitz days for every single service planning area on a separate day. That way that there is enough resources being allocated throughout the county and for each of those different groups. We are also encouraging more support from our county partners. They were a great asset this year to be able to help us with the youth count, and we're hoping to be able to expand those support from them. Under the demographic survey, as it was mentioned, besides doing the trainings, we are doing the escalation and team building and NARCAR training. We're also piloting phone survey options for some of the sites and providers, looking more into the family solution centers and some of our youth programs as well to be able to do that. And then also having assigned designated project assistants to train and oversee surveying at family solution centers, safe parking programs, and youth survey sites to have that additional support given to all of you. So those are some of the new developments for this year. We will be sharing more information on the app as we have that available. And volunteer recruitment. So we do have, as you know, social media toolkit that we have utilized in the past. We have that, it's going to be available. We will send you the links to all those different platforms. You can also copy and paste all the different emails, little messages that you can send to your family and friends so they can help us in recruiting volunteers. The Homeless Count website is being updated. It will go live tomorrow. The only option that will not be actively open will be the deployment sites, people to be able to select the deployment sites. Those are being confirmed and should be available and finalized within the next couple of weeks. And then lastly, community info sessions. One of the topics that we are gonna be covering is the volunteer recruitment process. So this is just to help you, and as you know, for 2022, we were able to get 5,000 volunteers. Our goal is to go back up to our 8,000. So we'll talk about strategies to help us in getting back those numbers up. So we are gonna implement again our community info sessions. So these happen to be like 1-hour sessions throughout the 3 months leading to homeless count. So we have the community agreement forms, and that's basically to ensure that all the development side coordinators have an understanding of what the form is, how to upload it, and so forth. And then the volunteer recruitment strategies, we're looking at having that in mid-November. And then the homeless count app in December, and then a Q&A portion in January before the first week in January, so that we basically have addressed a lot of your concerns during that time.